Bible is
Sermon
concerns with
17,
character,
Joseph.
one of my favorites, and that is the character of Joseph. Many people remember Joseph as the young man. When he was a young man, his father made him a coat of many colors. And many Bible lessons to young people have been taught concerning Joseph and his coat of many colors. When we think of the patriarchs, usually the following comes to mind. We think of Abraham as the man of faith. It is through Abraham that all the nations of the earth are blessed. And you and I, being Christians, are blessed through Abraham because of the promise that God gave to him that the Messiah would come. And then when we think of Isaac, we think of Isaac as the promised son. You may remember that Sarah tried to help God out in helping to fulfill the promise that God had made to Abraham, and she offered Hagar, her handmaid, and Ishmael was born to Hagar. Abraham fathered Ishmael, and he thought, this will be the one through which the promise will be fulfilled, but God said it's not to be so, that both Abraham and Sarah, they together would have a son, and they would raise up children, and these children would go into a strange nation. This nation would afflict them for 400 years, and then they would come out, and of course talking about the children of Israel. Then also when we think about the patriarchs, we think about Jacob. And when we think about Jacob, we think about Jacob being the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, and his name being changed to Israel. But Joseph was also a patriarch. And Joseph is, as I mentioned, one of my favorite characters in the Bible. There's more space given to him in the book of Genesis than any other character. Most of the book of Genesis that you'll read will surround the life of Joseph and the things that he did. There's not a single word of reproof that's spoken against Joseph in the Bible, which speaks a lot to his character. That's not to say that there's not some things, that kind of got Joseph in trouble, maybe, as we'll see tonight. But Joseph was a good man. He was pure in heart and thought and dedicated to his father, and also dedicated to God. He was true to those that he would serve while here on this earth, positions that he was in, whether as a position of being one who worked for his father, or being one who was a ruler, set up in a position of being a ruler. His character was still steadfast. It was a character that can be spoken of very highly. Much like that of the Apostle Paul of the New Testament, even though Paul had those times in his life when he was persecuting Christians, he was doing so with a good conscience. He believed that what he was doing was right, even though it was indeed wrong. And living out his life, the end of his life as a Christian, he was able to say to the young evangelist Timothy, I have fought a good fight, I've finished the course, I've kept the faith. And he said, henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. So it did not matter in what position in life he was in. His character was such that he was dedicated and he was determined in the things that he was doing, and Joseph was that way. Joseph was an individual that was dedicated to those that he served, both God and his parents, and we'll find that later on in our studies that he was also dedicated to even the rulers of a nation that was not favorable to God, but a nation that was favorable to Joseph because of his great character. It's interesting also when you talk about Joseph to notice that he was one of 12 brothers, 12 children. And he would make up what we call the nation of Israel, and they would occupy the promised land. It's interesting that God chose Joseph in a way over his brothers to be the one that would deliver them from the famine that would be in the land, to be the one that would set an example not only for them, but also for the nation of Israel that would come after them, all the children of Jacob, that is his grandchildren, all the children of his sons, that Joseph would be a great Bible character, and his personal character would be an example that all of those that would come after him could follow. Because no matter what position he was in, he was always faithful to those that he served, as I've already mentioned. But Joseph, while he was in the land of Canaan, was hated by his brothers. I mean, they really had a hatred for him. One of the reasons that did not help the hatred that Joseph's brothers had for him was because he was a tattletale. I mean, he was a tattletale. When he was about 17 years old, he went to be with his half-brothers, the children of the handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah, Dan and Naphtali, and Gad and Asher. And he was there with them in the fields, and the Bible doesn't tell us what they were doing. But when Joseph went back to his father, the Bible says that Joseph basically told what they were doing. He told on them. You may have, in growing up, had one of those types of people in your family. We had one, her name was Joanne, that if you decided to do something you wasn't supposed to be doing, out of us 11 children, you didn't want to include Joanne in on it. because of conscience or whatever reason, she's going to tell. And my daddy knew that. And he knew if he was gone for a while to town or working or whatever, when he came home, he always wanted to go and have a little conversation with Joanne to see what's been going on while I'm gone. And she'd tell everything she knew. She'd even tell some things she didn't know. You know. And so Joseph went and told his father. Well, that didn't make his brothers very happy. You know, because children are going to do things. You know, they're going to do things. So that was one of the things that contributed to the hatred that Joseph's brothers had for them. Another thing that contributed to the hatred that Joseph's brothers had for him was his father's favoritism. The Bible says that Jacob loved Joseph more than all of his children because he was the son of his old age. That's just one of the reasons. That's what the Bible says. That he loved Joseph more than all of his children because he was the son of his old age. But I add to that there was another reason that he loved Joseph, because Joseph was the son of the wife that he loved the most. He was the son of Rachel. And Jacob and Rachel waited on Joseph a long time. And it was when she was well up in years that she gave birth to Joseph. And you may remember that her second child, Benjamin, when she gave birth to Benjamin, she died giving birth to Benjamin. So this was another reason that Jacob loved Joseph, was because he was the son, the older son of the wife that he loved the most. As the Bible says that he loved Rachel more than Leah and more than Zilpah and Bilhah. But not only did Joseph telling on his brothers and his father's favoritism make his brothers hate him more, but also the dreams that Joseph had caused his brothers to hate him more. Joseph had a dream, and in his dream they were out in the field and they were cutting the grain and binding it together, and as you know, usually you would just lay that down. But Joseph said that his grain stood up, and that of his brothers bowed down to his, and they became very jealous. Now keep in mind that God had placed these dreams, or given Joseph these dreams, to indicate that what was going to happen in later years, that this was a sign of things that would come to pass. And Joseph, as a young man, was just relating his dreams to his brothers, but they, in their jealousy of their brother and their hatred for him, it only kindled that when he said, my bundle of grain there is standing up and yours is bowing down to it. And they're like, are you going to reign over us? And, what's going on? And so Joseph has a second dream. And in his second dream, he sees the sun, the moon, and the stars. And the moon and the stars are bowing down. And he represented there as the sun is bowing down to him. He even told this dream to his father. And his brothers, of course, they just hated him the more because of this. But his father just sort of put that back in his mind, in a reserve there to keep that he would think about. But because of all of this hatred that Joseph's brothers had for him, they sold him as a slave. They sold their own brother. They were so angry with him that they were willing to sell him as a slave, not caring what was going to happen. As we would say, basically the idea of just having no feelings whatsoever. They just wanted him to get out of life. But greater than that was, this was actually the second choice, because the first choice was to kill him. When I was a teenager, my youngest brother used to run around the house with a towel tied around his neck doing the Batman theme. And I said a number of times, I'm going to kill that child. He'd be going around the house going, dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, jumping on chairs and off of coffee tables and things like that. And I told my mom and dad, I'm going to kill him. If I ever catch him, I'm going to kill him. So I understand. But they meant it. They literally wanted to kill him. Reuben, the oldest son, knew that it was so. And he said, no, let's just take him and let's put him in a pit. See, he was trying to calm him down a little bit because he wanted to get Joseph out of there and take him back to his father. And take him back. And someone says, well, why would Reuben do that? I think there was a lot of reasons. I think Reuben didn't like Joseph, just as the other brothers didn't like him. But also Reuben loved his father, and he knew that the death of Joseph, if something happened to Joseph, it would literally crush his father. Because this was his favorite. And being the oldest son, he would receive the responsibility for that. Being in a large family, I know how that is. When your parents, they expect you to be responsible for those that are younger than you. And if something happens to them, no matter what it is, even if they get in trouble, your parents are going to look to you and say, well, you should have been looking out for them. And you should have been making sure that nothing bad happened. So Reuben was taking on that responsibility, and he had in his mind, the intention was to get Joseph out of the pit and to take him to his father so that his brothers could not do harm to him. But they were determined that they were going to kill him. And so Judah also put forth his effort to spare his brother's life. And he was the one that suggested, when they saw the Ishmaelites, the band of Ishmaelites, evidently the Bible says they were Midianites, which means that they were actually descendants of Ishmael that lived in the land of Midian, and they were on their way to Egypt to conduct trade, to buy and sell, to take goods down there, to trade to the Egyptians, to buy things from the Egyptians to take back to the land of Midian. And when they saw this caravan of travelers, then Judah immediately came up with the idea, because he did not want his brother to be put to death. He said, let's just sell him to the Ishmaelites. And so they agreed, because he said, we don't want the blood of our brother on our hands. And so they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and they came up with this story. They stripped him of his coat of many colors, and they killed a lamb, and they poured the lamb's blood on the coat, and they took the coat to their father Jacob, and they gave him the coat, and they asked him the question, is this your son's coat? And of course they knew that it was. And Jacob, recognizing the coat that he had made for his son with his own hands, and then seeing the blood, concluded, they did not say to their father, your son is dead. They did not say to their father, your son has been killed by some wild beast. But seeing the coat and seeing the blood, Jacob came to the conclusion that his son has been torn to pieces by some wild animal. And he was heartbroken. And he grieved. And he mourned for his son. You know, one of the things that I don't understand about this story in the Bible is, how could these 11 brothers, if all 11 knew, the Bible doesn't say that all 11 knew about what had happened. There may have been a case that some of them didn't know. But how could the ones that knew about what had taken place watch their father, not just for a little while, but for many years of his life, going around with a broken heart, thinking that the son that he loved more than anything in life was dead? Paul, in writing to the church at Rome, says that the things that are written aforetime are written for our learning. No greater example do we have in the Bible that a person can honestly and sincerely believe a lie than this. Jacob could not have been more convinced of the demise of Joseph had Joseph actually been dead. Nothing that his other children could do could comfort him. He had lost the son that he loved more than anything in the world. His other sons had not told him that Joseph was dead. Seeing the coat and seeing the blood, he assumed that he was dead. Not only thinking about that, I'm sure that in the mind of Jacob, there was this thought: I was the one that sent him to Shechem. I was the one that sent him up there. My dad's oldest sister was killed in a car accident, and most of the rest of my grandfather's life, he blamed himself because he let her go. And my grandmother spent many hours and days trying to convince him it wasn't his fault, but he still believed that it was. Because he had given her permission to take his car and drive to a friend's house, and she pulled out in front of another car, and a car hit her and she died. And he blamed himself for it. And I'm sure that Joseph, when he thought about that, he was the one, as he thought about it, he thought, I sent him up there. I sent him to Shechem. When he needed someone to go to show you the faithfulness of Joseph and the character and the dedication that he had for his father, even knowing how much his brothers hated him, when Jacob said to Joseph, I need you to go and check on your brothers, he said, here am I. In other words, I'm ready. I'm ready to do what you want me to do. I'm willing to do that. And I'm sure that all of this added to his father's grief as he thought about that, and as he remembered here this coat that he had made for his son, and he saw the blood here that was on this coat, and thinking in his mind that some wild beast had just literally torn him apart. He could not have believed it anymore had it not been actually true. But it was a lie. It was a lie. And it is true today that people who have been taught something contrary to the will of God believe it sincerely. There are people in this world that have been taught that you do not have to be baptized in order to be saved. Even though the Bible says the like figure whereunto even baptism does also now save us. There are people that believe so strongly that you do not have to do that. I remember speaking to my dad's youngest brother, who was a pilot in the Air Force and fought in 2 wars, and he was also a prisoner of war, and listening to him and having great admiration for him and seeing the respect that he had for the enemy. When he talked about the Japanese soldiers those who flew for the Japanese army, he spoke in respect for them because he said it takes a lot of dedication for a man to get in a plane knowing that you're not coming back. American soldiers climbed in their planes hoping they would come back. Japanese soldiers climbed in their planes knowing they would not come back. Because after all of their bombs or shells had been spent, their orders were to fly their plane into other aircraft, ships, or whatever. And in doing so, they believed that their lives would be greater, that their lives would be given in honor in doing that. And I can remember my dad's brother saying, you know, that person requires a lot of respect. We may say he's crazy, but he's dedicated to what he believes. And Jacob believed a lie. And a person can believe something that's wrong with just as much strength and energy and dedication as they can something that's right. We see that, as I mentioned earlier, in the life of the Apostle Paul. He believed when he was standing and watching Christians being put to death that he was doing what God wanted him to do. But he was so wrong. Describing later in life what he had done in his early life, he said, I am the chief of sinners. I am the chief of sinners. So it is possible for a person to live their life dedicated to that which they believe and be totally wrong. And that is the lesson that we see in the character of Joseph when Jacob believed that his son that he loved was dead. If you're here tonight and need to respond to the invitation, won't you do so while we stand and while we sing?